Hello, everyone. Welcome everyone to this crucial webinar on Zionism is Racism, a discussion around Motion A105. My name is Tariq Khawaja, and I'll be chairing the webinar today. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting at a particularly significant moment. This week alone, we've seen 3 stark reminders of why Motion A105 is not just important, but urgent. First, the courts have ruled that the prescription of Palestine action was both unlawful and disproportionate. This decision comes as a vindication for those who have long argued that the designation of Palestine Action as a terrorist organization was politically motivated rather than based on evidence or proportionality. Over £10 million of public money was spent policing the prescription of Palestine Action. The Labour Party spent £700,000 defending the ban in court and will spend more on appealing the ruling as unlawful. This is money that could have been used to fund 3,500,000 free school meals, tackle homelessness, and cut down the cost of living, but instead has been used to protect arms manufacturers and criminalizing people who oppose genocide. Second, the British Museum's recent decision to remove the word Palestine from its ancient Middle East displays following a complaint by UK lawyers for Israel. The British Museum holds artifacts that have taken from the very region whose name it is trying to erase. Artifacts that were removed under colonial power and which the museum refuses to return. Meanwhile, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization has verified damage to at least 145 religious and archaeological sites in Gaza since October 2023. Representing an unprecedented act of cultural destruction and at a time in which Palestinian heritage is being physically obliterated. This museum has chosen to assist in its symbolic erasure. And third, and most urgently, Israel has just fast-tracked new legislation, the Israel Penal Law, Amendment number 159, the death penalty for terrorists 2025. This law is designed to systematically target Palestinians, to create yet another layer of apartheid legal framework that denies due process and imposes the death penalty based on discriminatory standards, as well as accelerate the erasure and genocide of Palestinians. Healthcare groups such as Nurses for Palestine, UK health petitions to the Royal Colleges, and coalitions including Greens for Palestine signed a letter to the Prime Minister condemning this legislation and urging him to take action. These developments make our discussion today not just timely, but essential. They demonstrate precisely why Motion A105 matters, because it addresses the root ideology that enables such systematic oppression. Now, we have 3 incredible speakers joining us today, each with unique expertise on they give to Motion A105. We have Lubna Speitan, a Palestinian artist and activist who proposed the motion. She will share the personal and political journey behind the groundbreaking initiative. We have Professor Haim Bresheeth-Zabner, an Israeli Jewish anti-Zionist scholar who will provide critical analysis from within the Jewish communities opposing Zionism. And we have Frank McGuinness, an anti-Zionist barrister who will examine the legal frameworks and international dimensions recognizing Zionism as racism. Each speaker will have between 10 and 15 minutes to present their perspectives, after which we'll open the floor to Q&A. Now, an important note for participation. For those watching on YouTube, comments will be closed during the Q&A section. However, for our interactive StreamYard participants, we'll have a full Q&A capabilities after all the presentations, just to ensure focused discussion and maintaining accessibility for all viewers. So without further ado, let's welcome our first speaker. We're honored to welcome Lubna Speitan, the Palestinian artist and activist who proposed Motion A105, Zionism is Racism. As a member of both the Greens for Palestine steering group and Greenwich Palestine Alliance, Lubna brings a unique perspective that combined lived experience as a Palestinian with her art and her activism. Lubna's journey as both a Palestinian artist and the motion proposer gives her a powerful understanding of how Zionist ideology manifests in daily life. Through cultural erasure, displacement, and systemic dehumanization, her work embodies the resistance that Motion A105 seeks to support and amplify. Welcome, Lubna. The floor is yours.
For your lovely intro. Now, I must add here, I haven't painted since the genocide of our people began. Instead, I chose to fight against the war machine so that one day our children of Palestine may be able to raise their brushes and paint the stories of both their struggles and their liberation. For most people in here, the discussion around this motion has been political. For us, it's existential. Our existence as Palestinians has been defined by witnessing a relentless cycle of escalating violence, the slow and steady seizure of our land, and a pervasive international silence that has normalized our suffering. We've watched our people live stream their own genocide, the indiscriminate bombing, the destruction of homes, hospitals, universities. It's not a conflict. It is a systematic erasure. Since childhood, I, with many more children of the diaspora, have witnessed the continual massacres of our people and loved ones, the theft of our families' homes. My grandmother, and that's her behind me, Allah Yerhamah, who was forced, with many, thousands, many more, dispossessed during the first Nakba. Many more of our relatives slaughtered before now and during this current genocide. My father also bearing the wounds and horrors and torment of life under Israeli occupation. And now with the current onslaught, we've seen terms like WCNSF, Wounded Child No Surviving Family, largest globally held children prisoners captive in Israeli torture camps, people who are now enduring rape, electrocution, organ extraction, targeting of medical and aid workers, journalists, starvation used as a weapon, a testing ground of weapons and tech to hunt Palestinians, the poisoning of water wells, also targeting of animals whose precious lives are not also spared, and our prisoners now facing a new imposed death sentence. We have a whole generation of limbless and orphan children, a truth so harrowing that media outlets who continue to bury the truth of this matter place themselves also within the systemic participation of the genocide of our people. The two-state delusion dead and buried under the rubble with our children as Israel continues its expansive erasure across the West Bank and making explicitly clear that they will not accept a Palestinian state, enforcing this further with its plan for a greater Israel project, which expands beyond Palestine and poses a greater regional threat and with it, a threat to world peace. And alongside this physical erasure, there's a political one. A strategy that silences dissent by conflating any criticism of the Israeli state with anti-Semitism. It's a bitter irony that the historical trauma of Jewish people inflicted in Europe is now weaponized to justify the oppression of us, the indigenous people of Palestine. We did not choose our occupiers, but are paying the price for a persecution we did not enact. This is the bitter reality that birthed the Motion A105. And tonight I want to share the journey behind that motion, explaining why naming Zionism as racism is not just a political statement, but a necessary act of survival, and explore the role of political activism within resisting this erasure. Following the Green Party's recognition of Israel as an apartheid state committing genocide and its democratic member-led process, I felt this foundation we can build upon, so I decided to join. But when I asked about the party's position on the one-state versus two-state solution, I was told it's for the Palestinians to decide. Whilst for some this might have sounded respectful, but as a Palestinian, I had to ask what oppressed people would choose to live under their oppressor's boot. And when I read the existing policy, I ultimately, I saw it deferred to a joint Israeli-Palestinian decision. And that right there is the crux of the problem. You cannot ask the occupier and the occupier to negotiate the terms of liberation. It's not a negotiation. Our oppressor cannot be allowed to define the terms of our freedom. That realization forced us to confront the root cause, to strip it all back to its racist, rotten core. We cannot simply treat the symptoms, the checkpoints, the settlements, the torture, the bombings, the apartheid walls, without naming the racism behind it. Zionism. This ideology that normalizes our suffering. It's the political framework that inverts victim and villain, casting the colonizer as the victim and the indigenous population as a problem to be managed or erased. Our motion is our attempt to correct that. It's a result of opposing decades of oppression and months of work with fellow Palestinians, both in the party, outside of it, and in honor to the Palestinian tenets agreed by Palestinian factions before the Oslo Accords, also further denied our right to resist, and with the invaluable support that we've had from our Jewish allies, groups like IJAN and JMP. It's our declaration that the Green Party must move from observing the symptoms of injustice to dismantling its ideological foundation. So what that looks like on the ground, it's not just about territory, but it's an attack on our very identity and existence. Zionism as a settler-colonial project requires the erasure of the indigenous population, not just physically, but culturally. It systematically targets our heritage. It's the bulldozing of villages, the renaming of our cities with Hebrew names, the suppression of our language and the theft of our archives, ecocide, genocide, scholasticide. And why it's so urgent? Why now? Because the world is running out of time. We fear that by the time the international community finishes debating semantics, there'll be nothing left of Palestine but a memory. And we won't wait for our colonizers' crocodile commemorations. This motion is not just about Palestine. It's a test of the world's commitment to universal justice, the ongoing atrocities in Gaza and the West Bank, and the profound impunity with which they are committed, these crimes, establish a perilous global precedent. It signals that international law is a facade and such crimes can be replicated everywhere else. In the UK, we see the extension of this. Politically abandoned by a Labour leadership shaped by pro-Israel sentiment, we see the state deploying authoritarian tactics, prescribing non-violent groups like Palestine Action as terrorists, imprisoning protesters without bail, and attacking our right to dissent, while the true terrorizers, those funding these war crimes, and the IOF who slaughter our families and people, continue walking the streets here amongst us, in our Olympics, in our footballs, without sanctions or accountability. This repression happens alongside cuts to the NHS, welfare, the demonization of Muslims and migrants. It's all connected. It's a calculated effort to divide us and leave us so exhausted and hungry and afraid, ultimately, to exist. This is why Motion A105 is so vital and comprehensive. It connects the dots. By firstly defining and establishing that Zionism is racism and proceeds to declare the Green Party as anti-Zionist, it rejects all attempts to normalize the racist subjugation and oppression of Palestinians and rejects attempts to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, whilst affirming that definitions of anti-Jewish discrimination should not equate with Jewish identity and Zionist ideology, or conflate Israel with Judaism, as do examples of definitions like the IHRA and JDA, definitions which have been designed to silence our voices, along with the voices of our advocates and Jewish allies who also oppose Israel and its continued genocide and war crimes, designed ultimately to protect Israel from criticism and to shield racism. Following on from previous motions passed by the party, affirming Israel's an apartheid state, genocide, and supporting reparations and accountability, this motion supports the establishment of a single democratic Palestinian state in all of historic Palestine, with Jerusalem as its capital, equal rights for all, and the right of return for Palestinians and their descendants. Correcting here the injustice of Balfour and his giving away an anti-Emma right to give. It affirms the Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination, including the right of Palestinian people to resistance and liberation from Israeli occupation, domination, and subjugation, and acknowledges that the struggle to achieve that liberation by all available means under international law is legitimate. It heeds the calls from Palestinian civil society to impose broad boycotts, divestment, sanctions, and embargo initiatives similar to those applied to South Africa, apartheid era. It also calls for the release of prisoners of conscience, including Marwan Barghouti, the end of the use of administrative detention of Palestinians by Israel, and the treatment of Palestinian combatants. It calls for the deprescription of Palestine Action and for the release of all prisoners detained for non-violent direct action in support of Palestinian rights and the end of genocide, along with supporting the demands of the Prisoners for Palestine. I'll end with this. We proposed this motion unsure of its reception, but certain of its necessity. We're heartened and overwhelmed by the support it has received. And that support tells us that people are waking up. It tells us that if you refuse to be complicit or compliant in the face of injustice, this is what it's showing us. We refuse to be compliant. It also has, of course, received criticism and attacks from the opposition. This including the typical fear-mongering antics and Hasbro used to silence Palestinian voices, advocates of Palestinians, from attempts to smear, threaten, deflection tactics, victim blaming, gaslighting, to the lowly reporting to counter-terror police. Articles also posted making serious misportrayal and allegations against this motion and individuals, including myself and the Green Party Deputy Motion Ali, with attempts also made to filibuster the prioritization process with amendments negating and contradicting the demands of this motion. Not, of course, based on the facts of the matter. These are ill-faith attempts to undermine, demonize, and attack us, which only further demonstrate why this motion is so very necessary. These attempts to derail the motion will only strengthen our dissent and unite those of us who oppose racism, genocide, and apartheid. And the record-breaking number of supporters of this motion responds quite aptly to this. The support from our comrades beyond the party for the motion, those who speak for it and carry it, have already ensured its victory. We are confronting a racist narrative that has for far too long continued with impunity. We distinguish the differences between the oppressor and the oppressed. There is no neutrality here. We will and must continue to confront this, to oppose racism in all its forms, and that includes Zionism. To stand by and do nothing as genocide unfolds is worse than the prospect of death itself. What is being done to our people and our family in Palestine is paving the way for what will be done again to others elsewhere. We're already witnessing this. You have Sudan, Venezuela, it's a long list. It's horrifying. And supporting this motion is ultimately a vote for a world where indigenous rights matter. It's a vote for a world where international law is more than just words on a page, and a vote to dismantle the racist ideology of Zionism and rebuild something just in its place, a free and liberated Palestine from the river to the sea. I hope you'll all share this journey with us and prioritize our motion for a vote on conference. It began in this country and must end in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lubna, for that powerful presentation. Following that, we're extremely privileged to welcome Professor Haim Bresheeth-Zabner, an Israeli filmmaker, photographer, and film studies scholar who currently teaches at SOAS University and previously retired from the University of East London, where he worked since 2002. His books include An Army Like No Other, How the Israel Defense Forces Made a Nation, and the best-selling Introduction to the Holocaust. He has been on the editorial board for the journal Kamsin until 1991. He has also, his films include a widely shown 1989 film, The State of Danger, a documentary on the First Palestinian Intifada. And he's been published in many newspapers in Hebrew, mainly published in the Israeli Haaretz broadsheet, as well as English language articles, mainly published in Cairo-based Al Aram Weekly. Professor Bresheeth-Zabner brings a crucial perspective to this discussion as a Jewish Israeli who has long been critical of Zionism. His background provides a unique vantage point for understanding Zionism, not just as an external analysis, but also as someone with direct experience of Israeli society and internal contradictions of Zionist ideology. His perspective is particularly valuable for understanding the distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism that the motion A105 carefully articulates, showing how an opposition to a political ideology differs from the prejudice against Jewish people. Welcome, Haim. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me to this important meeting. Thank you for all members of the Green Party who are, you are the first people in this country, in a mainstream party, who are going to discuss and hopefully agree an anti-Zionist identity for your country, for which I am very thankful, and I'll explain why and why I speak to you today about this topic. You can see from my age that I'm near 80, and I was born in a DP camp in Rome after the Second World War. Both my parents were the only survivors of their families, and both of them survived Auschwitz. I was born in Italy, and we came to Israel, which was a two-week-old in 1948. My father refused to fight. He refused to hold a gun and kill and be killed, and was actually arrested and jailed for this crime. He said to the judge that after 6 years in the ghetto and almost a year in Auschwitz, and later in even a worse camp than Auschwitz called Gusen II in Austria, he refused to assist the killing of anyone. He spent some 6 weeks in jail until he was persuaded to serve as an unarmed medic, which he did, and saved the lives of many people. We were living in Jaffa in an area called Jabalia, and you would know the name Jabalia. It's part of Gaza, and it's called Jabalia because all the people, or almost all the people of the original Jabalia in Jaffa, next to Tel Aviv, ended up in Gaza when they were expelled in April 1948, before the proclamation of the Israeli state. They ended up in Gaza and called the camp Jabalia. We lived in the original Jabalia, which was purged of its Palestinians. Some Palestinians remained, and I grew up with Palestinian children and never realized until I went to school that I should hate them. Of course, you learn this at school. So why am I speaking to you today? Because I've been an opponent of Zionism and its crimes for 55 years. And why am I opposing this terrible political movement that has now come to genocide after many other crimes? I'm opposing it as a Jew. I'm opposing it as an Israeli. I'm opposing it as a human being and as a citizen of this country that started the war on Palestine with its Balfour Declaration that should have never been allowed. And I'm calling upon you to remember that the first Zionism is racism resolution was passed by the UN in the 70s. It was passed by a huge majority because at the time, Israel did not control the West in the way that it does now. And it meant that people could understand that a settler-colonial state of the kind that Israel was not from the day it started, but 20 years before that day, or even 30 years before that day, when the British have taken Palestine, that type of state does not belong in the 20th century. Now, remember that in 1948, 2 apartheid states were declared, the apartheid state of South Africa and the apartheid state of Israel. Fortunately, the South Africans have no apartheid anymore and didn't have it for the last 30 years. They had a black president that the whole world was honoring. We don't have that in Palestine. What we do have is the settler-colonial state now genociding the Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but elsewhere. I am part of an organization that I was founder of, the Jewish Network for Palestine, and thousands of Jews in London and elsewhere in the UK, together with the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, which is working not only in this country, but in many other countries. It's an American organization in origin. Together, tens of thousands of Jews support our two organizations against Israel's crimes. And you are the only party of mainstream Britain that has taken upon itself to support the Palestinians, whose leader and deputy leader are speaking for Palestinian rights. And of course, Jews in this country should be extremely wary about supporting Israel, because doing so is actually guaranteeing the growth of anti-Semitism. And, you know, quite a large minority of Jews in this country, and a very large and even larger minority of Jews in the United States, for example, most young Americans who are Jewish are not supporting Israel. We are not there yet in this country, but we'll get there, because young people can see that the crimes of the fathers are no good. And we're talking to young Jews everywhere, and they are coming in great numbers to the anti-Zionist camp. Now, why are we calling it anti-Zionism rather than anti-Israel? Because the real problem is apartheid, like in South Africa. And in our case, this apartheid is called Zionism. And Zionism is a settler-colonial movement which is racist, which is based on Jewish supremacism, which is something that, as son of two Holocaust survivors, I would die before I support. We cannot support any type of racist supremacism anywhere. And as a Jew, I would fight that to the death. I would fight to get the Palestinians equality, justice, and peace. Because without their justice, without their peace, without their equality, as we were told by Bishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela when they came to Palestine on two different occasions, they told us then, no one is free until Palestine is free. We cannot be free as Jews and Israelis anywhere if we are enslaving a whole nation and now working to actually totally exterminate the Palestinians. Why would anyone do that? Why did the Nazis do that? Why did the different countries in Europe start genocides? Why did the Ottoman Empire start a genocide against the Armenians? All these genocides and many others, there were 67 genocides in the last 200 years. Remember the genocide of the North American population. 15 to 20 million people died because they were not white. The Palestinians are dying because they are not Jewish. How could Jews who suffered through the generations support this madness, support this crime? live with doing it. What is Jewish about genocide? What is human about genocide? It's not just that it is illegal. It is totally immoral. It is totally forbidden for any Jew or for any Muslim or for any Christian or for any human being. The Genocide Convention that creates the legal barrier to further genocide was never very successful, but now it doesn't even exist. And this was something written by someone called Lemkin, who happened to be a Jew. And that is why he has done the work for years on formulating a convention that for once and for all will bring the end of this crime to humanity. Now, we can see now that as opposed to the Nazi genocide of Jews that was kept very secret, as you know, and a lot of Germans kept saying after the war they had no idea about it. And actually, I think that most of them were right. They didn't have any idea about it and probably would not even have supported it because they didn't know about it. It was kept a secret. This genocide is not a secret. This genocide is not only shared on all our telephones, including telephones that are held by little children that see other little children being killed. A 3-year-old girl living next door to us asked her father, "What will we do if the Israelis come here?" A 3-year-old girl, because she saw Palestinian children being killed and starved by Israel. This is a different type of genocide. This is a genocide in the light of day. This is a genocide that Israeli perpetrators of are so proud of what they are doing. They are sharing it with their families and actually are sharing it online with their friends. They are sending it to the wives and children as, here I am blowing a university for you, my dear wife. Can you imagine that? The Nazis didn't do that. I'm not comparing. I'm just pointing out that the Nazis kept this secret. The Turks kept it secret. The Germans who killed the Herero people in 1905 kept it secret. Why? Because they knew it's a terrible crime. The Israelis don't think that what they're doing is a crime. That is a measure of their racism, a measure of their racial supremacy, and the hateful. I just want to give you one figure, which is very interesting. This is the most democratic genocide that humanity has seen. In 2024, there were 2 polls done. 2024 is the highest point of the genocide, okay? In the spring of 2024, the Tel Aviv University ran 2 polls. And the questions were very simple. Is Israel using the right amount of violence in Gaza? Is Israel using enough violence in Gaza, or is Israel using too much violence in Gaza? You had 3 options. Only Jews were asked. The Palestinians were not asked for their opinion because it's a racist system. Let me tell you that 97.1% of all the Jews that were asked said that either Israel is using the right amount of violence in genocide in Gaza, or not enough. And about 1.7 or 1.8% of those who asked said that Israel is doing too much, using too much violence in Gaza. This is a very democratic and popular genocide. Most Israelis support it by a percentage that wasn't even available to dictators when they went for elections, 97%. Now that meant that the Israelis were united, and also meant that the number of people that went into Gaza and did the genocide with their hands and with their arms was around between 300 and 400,000 Israeli soldiers were called up and partook in the genocide. Do you know how many people, how many Germans actually operated Auschwitz, in which 20,000 people died every day? Less than 200 SS. So the killing fields of the Holocaust were extremely efficient. Few hundred people dealt with the whole system, and actually the whole operation in Auschwitz and in other camps were actually done by the inmates who did the welcome of the people who arrived, who got them into the showers, who got them to remove their clothes, and then they moved the bodies into the ovens and so on. The Germans were not involved in this. So a very small number of Germans did an incredible number of murders. The Israeli genocide is different. Hundreds of thousands of people are involved directly, and their families are involved and voted for it in the polls, in a sense. It's not an election, but the polls were of thousands of people totally representing the Israeli population. I call upon you to support what the party is doing, because I think the only way to stop this genocide, which is still extant and continues, and to stop the removal of Palestinians from the West Bank as well as from Gaza, is to actually do what the UN did in 1975. Israel, with its growing power, the years after, managed to reverse the UN resolution. Israel, which has committed more war crimes than any other country member of the UN, has never faced any sanctions. Iran has faced sanctions for 45 years. Cuba has faced sanctions for 60 years. These are countries that never attacked anyone. Never. Iran had to defend itself from Saddam Hussein for 8 years for a war that the West has foisted upon them. Cuba had to defend itself from the United States. Neither country has attacked anyone, and neither country wanted a war, but they had the sanctions imposed on them. Israel has never had any sanctions. In 1949, the UN realized the terrible mistakes that it did by dividing Palestine, and they passed a resolution, Resolution 194, that demands that Israel returns 750,000 Palestinians that it expelled in the Nakba of 1948. Israel just pissed on this and said, get lost. We are not going to get anyone back into their homes. I know, I lived in a Palestinian home as a child. And so did millions of Israelis in the houses of 750,000 Palestinians. In the year 1967, I was a soldier. I saw another Nakba. 325,000 Palestinians were expelled into Jordan. So all in all, it makes about 1,100,000 Palestinians expelled militarily from their own country. And now Israel wants to expel all Palestinians. We have to stop this. We have to stop Britain that started this. We have to stop Britain from supporting this genocide. We have to stop this prime minister. Enough. He is, like all prime ministers of this country, totally supportive of Israeli crimes. I think the Green Party is actually trying to grasp the nettle of war crimes, not just of Israel, but also of Britain and the West. And thank you very much for it. Please do all you can to make this resolution high on the agenda. The procedure will be explained, I'm sure. And we have to make sure that the Green Party is the first, but not the last, to demand this of the UN, to demand sanctions that will end this shameful, criminal genocide of the Palestinians after more than 100 years. It's 110 years since Britain started this with the Balfour Declaration. Enough is enough.
Thank you so much, Haim, and thank you for that incredible, important context as well. Finally, I want to move on to our next speaker. We're delighted to welcome Frank McGuinness, anti-Zionist barrister and co-director of Riverway to the Sea. Frank brings essential legal expertise to our discussion, providing the critical framework for understanding Motion A105 through the lens of international law and human rights. His work at Riverway to the Sea is fundamentally geared towards holding state and corporate actors accountable for their complicity and participation in racist violence against Palestinians. He has specific experience in representing anti-Zionist organizations and people in a wide range of legal contexts. Frank's analysis will help situate Motion A105 within the framework of international and legal obligations, as well as a broader historical and political context of what actually it takes to overcome and defeat colonial projects. Please join me in welcoming Frank McGuinness. Frank, the floor is yours. I'll just quickly unmute you.
Oh, there we are. Found it. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and I commend everyone who's responsible for bringing this important motion to the Green Party. I've come here to talk about the role of the motion, the role that it might play in the broader strategy for the total Palestinian liberation from the river to the sea, and the ongoing project to defeat the apartheid state of Israel and its fascist ideology of Zionism. So I'm going to structure my contribution tonight in the following way. I'm going to make a few introductory remarks about my own political position and my relationship to the Green Party and broader British politics. Then four things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about strategy and tactics and the specific problem of the phenomenon of the what you might call the judicialization of politics, the sort of intrusion of law into politics. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the fast-paced and shifting legal context in which we find ourselves in Britain as part of this broader crisis of Zionism. Thirdly, I'm going to talk specifically about problems with definitions like the so-called IHRA definition and the Jerusalem Declaration when it comes to combating anti-Semitism and anti-Palestinian racism. Fourthly, I'm going to make a few critical observations about the motion itself, drawing directly from the text, and then I'll conclude with a few remarks and closing thoughts. So on my relationship to the Green Party, I'm not a member of the Green Party. I am a revolutionary communist and an anti-imperialist, so I'm not a reformist, and I must admit to being skeptical of any reformist political project. I note the Green Party's current position is that it, quote, recognizes that NATO has an important role in ensuring the ability of its member states to respond to threats to their security, end quote. If the Green Party and indeed your party are to be successful in my view, they must avoid the trap of trying to rerun the failed electoral experiment, the sort of reformist parliamentary politics political project known as Corbynism. Corbynism failed. We should reckon with that fact, and we should think about a more successful, more effective strategy. And it's not possible, in my view, to implement socialist policies by just running for office in a bourgeois state and trying to form a government in a context that's fundamentally hostile to revolutionary politics, socialist politics, and anti-Zionist politics. In my view, if we are to intervene in elections, they should be used to criticize the bourgeois state and to increase proletarian and working class consciousness, and to agitate for important anti-imperialist positions, such as support for the Palestinian armed struggle and the project of abolishing the apartheid state of Israel. And so this motion clearly is a contribution to that struggle. I'm not making any simple or flattening analysis of the Green Party, and I offer critical support to this motion. All right. So the purpose of my comments is critical support, constructively critical. All right. I don't want any of the criticisms I'm leveling here to be taken in the wrong light. I support this motion, and I think it should pass. So the first thing I was going to talk about, strategy, tactics, and this problem of what I'm calling the judicialization of politics. And I want to start this sort of section by offering some caveats about or some theory about the relationship between the political and the legal. So in my opinion, the strategies that win subordinate any kind of legal tactics to a prior political strategy, in this case an anti-Zionist strategy that revolves around the observation that Palestine will be liberated on the battlefield in Palestine, and that our role in the diaspora is to try to lend what support we can to that Palestinian strategic choice. I'm very influenced in my thinking by the Marxist legal theorist Rod Knox, who talks about the relationship between strategy and tactics. And he cautions us about intervening in the terrain of law without a prior political strategy, because legal terrain is sort of enemy terrain. It's the laws of the British state are passed by our political opponents, and we have to be very cautious before we intervene on that terrain. So the point is, in my opinion, that we need to avoid two things, two sort of related traps, overcorrecting one way or the other. One is a sort of ultra leftist or a kind of anarchist overcorrection, a rejection of all struggle within parliaments and legal forms. And the second is a kind of left liberal overcorrection, a capitulation to the bourgeois state, bourgeois legal categories, its processes, its horizons, and its remedies, right? Fundamentally, we should be more ambitious than what the British state will allow us to be, right? The British state is never going to allow us to liberate Palestine. We're going to have to go beyond what the British state views as acceptable. And I think an analogy with the French in Algeria is helpful here, right? The French colonial empire was not driven out of Algeria by a persuasive legal argument in a courtroom, nor by a well-worded political party motion, right? As Marx put it, between equal rights force decides. And Marx once again, quote, "The weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticism of the weapon. Material force must be overthrown by material force, but theory also becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses," end quote. So on this judicialization, right, I'm trying to think about the role of law in the Palestinian struggle for liberation and politics more broadly. I want to think about a couple of examples. The first is this EHRC investigation that we all saw in the Labour Party under Corbyn, right? Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, now largely discredited organization, and openly Zionist, racist barristers like Adam Wagner Casey were among those involved in instigating that astonishing judicialization of politics, right? It was this attempt to intervene in a political party and to use legal mechanisms to inhibit its ability. So we now have the astonishing situation where the Labour Party, under its most left-wing leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was found to be institutionally racist. No other party in British political history has ever had that finding about them. Reform haven't had that finding about them. And so you can see the problem of what our enemies tend to do is they try to use law to smother politics. And that's an example. The EHRC investigation into the Labour Party is an example of how they succeeded. The second example relates specifically to this motion. I note that the racist apologists for apartheid in UK Lawyers for Israel, right? UK lawyers for an apartheid state while it commits a genocide. I see they're sniffing around this motion and trying yet again to use law to smother politics. So all I would say is I encourage everyone who supports this important motion to think deeply about the strategy that underpins it. Don't capitulate to law, don't capitulate to legal tactics. Keep politics and political leverage at the core of the strategy for ensuring that it passes. The second thing I was going to talk about is the changing legal context internationally, domestically, and the crisis of Zionism, right? So in my opinion, Zionism is clearly in a crisis. That is coming at an astonishing cost to Palestinians, right? Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been murdered. As Haim said, that's because the apartheid state of Israel views them as a racial threat to the demographic purity of Israel's ethno state. So I don't want to diminish the astonishing price that Palestinians are paying, but the result of all of that naked and racist violence is that Israel is now in a crisis. I want to ground us on what's happening in Palestine as we speak, right? Dropsite News has been very good. I commend them for their coverage of the genocide. They report 3 things happening today. Critically ill Palestinian man died in Gaza as Israel continues to restrict Rafah crossing. Hamas tells Dropsite it rejects President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's renewed demands for full disarmament in Gaza. And Israel moves to register West Bank land as state property. So these disturbing developments and the daily violence of the ongoing Israeli genocide notwithstanding, Zionism is in a crisis. The symptoms of this crisis are everywhere. And I think if you ask the average person on the street, even in a country like Britain, they will view Israel and its ideology as grotesque, responsible for the most nakedly racist violence, bombing hospitals, murdering children. That's how ordinary people now view Israel and its supporters. So at the international level, to state the obvious, I know many people on this call will be very familiar with the political situation, but it bears reiterating that we have these ICC arrest warrants, not only against the former defense minister, but also against the sitting prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. If he comes to the territory of his closest allies, he will be arrested. That's a really serious problem for the prime minister of that apartheid state. I note that the motion talks about this. The motion talks about the jurisprudence of the International Court of Justice. There are several different cases and proceedings relating to Palestine, some of them ongoing, of course. We've got South Africa's genocide case, and there are a growing number of judgments in that case that are absolutely devastating and provide an important historical record of Israel's violence and the things that its politicians say. But we also crucially have the judgment referenced in the Green Party motion from July 2024, which confirms that Israel's an apartheid state, right? It's in breach of the 3rd article of the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which means it's engaged in racial segregation and apartheid. So that's an indelible stain on Israel's reputation. And there's going to be legal consequences. There will be domestic legal consequences that we're starting. The dominoes are starting to fall, and it's becoming increasingly apparent that if British politicians and British public institutions continue to support an apartheid state, that there are going to be legal consequences. So that brings me to the British domestic context. I want to skim through 5 different arenas in which I practice, just to draw to people's attention what I'm sure many of us will be aware of, but again, it bears reiterating. The first of the 5 jurisdictions is the employment tribunal, right? So most people have some kind of relationship with an employer, so the employment tribunal is a very important jurisdiction. And we have the case of Miller in the University of Bristol, which continues to cast a very long shadow, and it establishes, again, as sort of a matter of political rather than legal precedent, that anti-Zionist philosophical belief can gain protection under the Equality Act. And what that means is that people in Britain are finding it increasingly simple to simply sue their employers if they are made to remove a Palestine badge, if they are disciplined or sacked for criticizing Zionism on social media. In short, if they get into trouble for being anti-Zionist and thinking that Israel is a grotesque affront to humanity that should be dismantled, people can sue their bosses and fight back. And Professor Miller's case has made it much easier to do that. Secondly, on asylum and immigration, in that context, Israeli citizens are being granted asylum, right? The British state is having to acknowledge that its ally in the apartheid state of Israel persecutes its own citizens, right? That's embarrassing. It's creating a diplomatic problem for Britain. Third is criminal context, Filton 24, and other Palestine action criminal trials. We saw the astonishing result of the first 6 Palestine action, Filton 24, acquittals and hung juries. So the British state is incapable of prosecuting people who take direct action in support of Palestine, because the cause is so popular that if you take 12 strangers off the street and ask them to convict someone for causing millions of pounds worth of damage to an arms factory, the state will fail to obtain a prosecution. In the regulatory context, I'll come back to to this in a bit, but Ghassan Abu Sitta's case is a good example of a regulated professional dragged in front of his regulator, and the regulator cannot obtain a regulatory prosecution. There's countless other examples. And then finally, the terrain of the Terrorism Act 2000. And if you take nothing else from my contribution tonight, it's that act, the Terrorism Act 2000, needs to be abolished, and we need to loudly call for that. And we have the astonishing Palestine Action victory in the High Court, an iconic example of legal tactics subordinated to a prior political strategy, right? And we can all learn a lot from that. And we also have the Hamas case, which is ongoing. The Islamic resistance movement challenges the British government's decision to prescribe that Palestinian resistance faction. So much for legal challenges. In domestic politics, it seems clear that to associate yourself with Zionism as a British politician is a very risky thing to do these days, right? Wes Streeting came within 500 votes of losing his seat to Lian Mohammed, the 24-year-old at the time Palestinian politician, independent politician, and Keir Starmer faces similar risks from Andrew Feinstein in his constituency. We have a growing number of anti-Zionist MPs in Parliament, and we've got Zara Sultana openly proclaiming herself an anti-Zionist. So the momentum is all in one direction, and this motion helps to make clear that there's clear political distance between the Greens and Labour on this issue. Anti-Zionism is a key front in the wider battle against the British far right and the Labour Party government that continues to enable and make space for the far right. And it's clear that we need to absolutely crush and defeat the Labour Party at the ballot box. It's not a socialist party. It's responsible for over a century of British imperialist violence, presided over the Indian colony in the 1940s, Iraq in 2003, Gaza genocide today. The party needs to be totally dismantled. It's not socialist. No anti-Zionist should be supporting it. Third thing I was going to talk about is problems with these definitions, IHRA and Jerusalem Declaration. The obvious problem with these definitions is that they're Zionist. They're premised to varying extent and in various ways on the Zionist notion that there should be an apartheid state of Israel, that it, is defined in explicitly racial terms, and any such project will always view non-Jews as some kind of problem to be solved. As Zionism collapses, as the crisis of Zionism deepens, these definitions become increasingly absurd and impossible to enforce. In the regulatory case of Hussein and the Solicitors Regulation Authority, so a case concerning a lawyer who was dragged in front of his professional regulator for things he said on social media, the judgment in that case, the High Court judgment, right? So this is the High Court of England and Wales, right? A key component of the British Empire for the longest time. And even the English High Court is saying, Mr. Justice Chamberlain in his judgment, paragraph 104 of that judgment, he confirms that it's perfectly permissible to call for, quote, the abolition of the state of Israel and its replacement with a unitary state comprising both Jewish and Palestinian citizens, end quote. That's the English High Court confirming that it's not anti-Semitic to call for the abolition of the state of Israel. Paragraph 105, he says, quote, nor in my judgment can it be regarded as axiomatically anti-Semitic to claim that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor, end quote. So just eviscerating the one of the most problematic examples of the IHRA definition. And then perhaps most astonishing of all, paragraph 109, and again, just an example of the complete collapse of Zionist positions in British courtrooms. The judge, the High Court judge, confirms that it's possible to compare the policies of Israel to those of Nazi Germany, and that doing so is not inherently anti-Semitic, despite what Zionists still try to suggest. So that's the crisis of Zionism and how it registers in the specifically British context. The fourth thing I was going to talk about was a brief critical analysis, a reading of some of the text of the motion itself. I'd start this section by pointing out it's a great name. Page 4. Conference resolves that 1, the Green Party declares itself to be an anti-Zionist party, end quote. Brilliant stuff, does what it says on the tin. More of this is to be encouraged. There is this interesting question about whether it's the place of a political party based in Britain to define Palestinian liberation. And I think we should think deeply about that. I'm thinking, for example, paragraph 3 of the motion says the Green Party supports the establishment of a single democratic Palestinian state in all of historic Palestine, with Jerusalem as its capital. We should think through what it means for a British political party to call for that, but certainly in a context where other political parties are calling for the two-state solution, it's a welcome intervention. Paragraph 4 talks about quote, the struggle to achieve that liberation by all available means under international law. That's a euphemistic way of saying that the Palestinians have a right to armed struggle and that we should support it. In my opinion, we should all loudly proclaim that Palestinians who choose to arm themselves in self-defense against colonialism and genocide. It's very important for us to proclaim our support for Palestinians as they do that. I note that paragraph 6 calls for the release of the Palestinian political prisoners, including Marwan Barghouti, who's mentioned by name. And while I welcome that, it was perhaps a missed opportunity to also name Ahmad Sadat, also known as Abu Hassan, who is the Secretary General of the Marxist-Leninist Party, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It brought a smile to my face that paragraph 7 talks about calling for the deprescription of Palestine action. Again, just a stunning example of the collapse of Zionist positions and the way that this motion is being overtaken by events as we speak. And I note also on page 7 that the motion invokes existing international law and UK laws that claim to protect all oppressed peoples. In my opinion, the motion is perhaps insufficiently critical of those British laws. They are extremely and violently racist, especially around the British border, the Immigration Act 1971, and all of these, this Blairite asylum legislation. I think our motions need to be more critical of British laws. I also note that at page 7, it talks about previous Green Party motions that call for the IDF to be prescribed as a terrorist agency. In my opinion, that's a fundamentally flawed strategy. Again, the demand should be for the abolition of the Terrorism Act 2000 and for the eradication of the very technique of prescribing organizations like that. And in my view, it's a mistake to call for the wielding of those illegitimate powers against organizations, even Zionist political opponents, because the risk is that it normalizes that power instead of calling it and affecting a strategy that results in those powers being abolished. So again, I reiterate, those criticisms are all constructive. I support the motion. In conclusion, I think I've run slightly over time, but I'll just say that a few concluding thoughts. Zionism is obviously racist. It's arguably fascist. And even if people disagree that it's inherently fascist, the apartheid state of Israel is in a terminal state of decline, and it is governed by openly fascist politicians, Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir. These people tell us that they're fascists, and we should believe them. To be anti-fascist requires you to be anti-Zionist. Jews who live in Palestine now have two choices. They can either embrace Palestinian national liberation, or they can leave. The third option is for them to embrace fascism, and we know what is to be done with fascists. We must collectively crush fascism in the political sphere, the economic sphere, the theoretical sphere, as well as in the sphere of military armed struggle. And this political motion forms an important part of the political struggle against Zionism. Zionism will be and is being defeated on the ground in Palestine. And that's why it's so important to publicly proclaim support for the Palestinian strategy of armed struggle. The apartheid state of Israel and the fascists who support it have never been so despised and politically isolated in the entire history of the Zionist project. Our Zionist political opponents are well and truly on the back foot. And so I offer my critical support to this motion and the people who drafted it, because I view it as a welcome escalation in the Palestinian struggle against Zionism. And I hope it brings a ray of hope to the people of Gaza. I encourage people to loudly and publicly support this motion, and if you're able to do so, to vote for it. And I want to end my contribution tonight by quoting from the communist Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, who said, quote, "We do injustice to Gaza when we look for its poems, so let us not disfigure Gaza's beauty. What is most beautiful in it is that it is devoid of poetry at a time when we tried to triumph over the enemy with poems, so we believed ourselves and were overjoyed to see the enemy letting us sing. We let him triumph. Then when we dried our lips of poems, we saw that the enemy had finished building cities, forts, and streets. We do injustice to Gaza when we turn it into a myth, because we will hate it when we discover that it is no more than a small, poor city that resists." End quote. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frank, for that contribution, and your analysis of the motion is extremely welcome. And I just want to say that moving on, we'll now be entering into our Q&A section. What I will do is I will open the chat for our StreamYard viewers. Before I do, I will ask that comments be related to questions specifically. So if you have a comment, please start your comment with the word question. I won't be looking at other comments that don't start with the word question. If you've got a specific speaker that you'd like to address for the motion to get their perspective on a specific question, then please reference the speaker in your question. So question 4. And lastly, I just want to state, if we can keep discussion and etiquette in terms of how people are kind of asking questions in the comments, and I will kind of reserve the right to kick people out if people are being dicks. But yeah, anyway, I will turn the chat on now, and I will move to our all speakers section. I'll ask all speakers who have them muted themselves, because I don't have the power to unmute you if you've done it yourself. Please click the unmute button underneath the little screen just to unmute yourselves. And then you should be able to do that. I will just double check. I think I've got some questions here that were sent to me earlier while we wait for questions to come in. So one thing that the motion has kind of stated and received some criticisms on is in terms of what about the Jewish people and the right to self-determination. And I also want to say that, you know, some certain people within the party and have kind of raised their concerns, have raised that this motion makes them feel maybe uncomfortable or makes Jewish people feel unsafe. So I'd like to go to Haim first in terms of this question, as your perspective as an Israeli Jew, and then I'll move to other speakers that may be willing to comment on that specific question. So yeah, Haim, over to you.
Thanks. First, I want to say that the Jewish people are not a nation. They are not an ethnicity. They are a cultural and religious group that lived historically in Europe, later on in North and South America, and of course in the Arab world. Just a note about history. Anti-Semitism was and remains a Western and European phenomenon. There was no anti-Semitism to speak of in the Arab and Muslim world. Jews were treated with as close to equality as was possible at all in most of the Arab world. So when we talk about anti-Semitism and feeling threatened, this is a European phenomenon. What historians called life in the Arab and Muslim East and West, they called it convivencia. Convivencia is living together, yeah, coexistence. And there was coexistence in the Arab and Muslim world. And it really pains me to see that now Zionism and Jews in this country and some other countries in Europe are speaking about the Arab and Muslim world as anti-Semitic. It never was true, and it isn't true now. But what I think Zionism is doing is producing anti-Semitism. This is the machine that produces anti-Semitism. And this is what happens when Jews are supporting in large numbers the crimes of Israel. Now, about self-determination. Self-determination is not available to settler-colonials. It wasn't available, or is not a real option for the French in Algeria. I think it's not available for British in Northern Ireland. The jury is still out on that. It wasn't available for whites in South Africa. When we discussed the end of apartheid, we didn't say, okay, let's have a two-state solution. Let's have a white state and let's have a black state. This is nonsense. South Africa is one state. and everyone is, you know, and if whites want to have self-determination as whites, they can go to the West, you know, not in South Africa, not in Algeria, and not in Palestine. Now, Jews and others that want self-determination cannot do it by genociding and ethnic cleansing a population in a country that doesn't belong to them, and therefore create self-determination in Palestine. This is a crime. Yeah. So if they want self-determination, let them find a country which is really empty. Like they said about Palestine when they took it over, it wasn't empty. It never was empty. The people of Palestine lived there for thousands of years, and they will continue to live there. So I'm not actually saying Jews need to leave, and the Palestinians are not saying that. Lubna has just created, defined what the rights of Jews are in the single Palestinian state that she has suggested, and which I am supporting and have been supporting since that idea was you know, advanced in 1947. This is when the idea comes from. So I think every Jew who is ready to live with non-Jews, in other words, with Palestinians, in equality, will be welcome in Palestine, but not people who want to use their supremacy to control Palestinians. That is going to end. So the question of not feeling safe, people should feel totally safe if they don't support racism. There is no threat to anyone who is not supporting the racist state of Israel and its policies. There's no threat for others as well, but they can expect anti-Semitism. And I'm not really looking forward as a Jew to a society with anti-Semitism more than my parents and their parents were looking forward to it. And most of my family, apart from my parents, was killed by anti-Semite Nazis. So this is a serious matter. But I don't think that there is anti-Semitism against Jews in Britain, but there might be a feeling of, you know, total rejection of Zionists, whether they are Jewish or not. Most Zionists are not Jewish. In the United States, there are 50 million Zionists who are not Jewish. They're, you know, extreme Christians. I don't want to live with people like that either. So I think we're talking about feeling of censure and disagreement against Zionists, and these are correct. It is not directed against Jews who are not supporting Zionism.
Thank you, Haim. I'll open that question up to other speakers if they wish to contribute. Otherwise, I will move on to the next question. So just let me know if you'd like to speak on that. Okay. So moving on to the next question. This is a question for Frank McGuinness. How would this, going forward on a legal basis, would start seeing and real change for sanctions on Israel and create a more global impact?
Well, I mean, the answer to this isn't really legal, right? It's mostly political. The question of whether or not a state decides to impose sanctions is a political one. And this is sort of what Rob Knox was getting at. And there's another Marxist theorist, China Miéville, who talks about the limits of international law. So international law isn't really law because there's no sovereign to enforce it. What is sovereign is something like the British state. So the British state has the sovereign power to impose sanctions if it wants to. And I was talking earlier about the crisis of Zionism. Some of you will have noted that the British state has in fact been forced to start imposing sanctions on its Israeli ally against named government ministers, right? So David Cameron, whenever he was the foreign minister, instigated this because some of the current Israeli ministers are so, even by British standards, are so racist. Even the British government has had to start imposing sanctions. So I think clearly it's helpful. What's necessary is to make it politically impossible to support Zionism. and this motion helps to do that. And once Zionism becomes politically toxic, then that will help to force bourgeois governments to impose sanctions on the apartheid state of Israel. So I don't think there's no easy answer. We just have to keep escalating our opposition to Zionism. But it seems clear that this motion is an important sort of step forward in the escalatory strategy against Zionism. And you know what's absolutely clear, and I know the motion references this: Palestinian civil society in 2005, a broad array of Palestinian civil society organizations, founded the BDS campaign calling for a widespread boycott, divestment, and sanctions on Israel. And it's, as I've said, what's clear for us outside Palestine, that does form an important part of our contribution to the struggle. But I would say that we shouldn't overstate the role of sanctions. The most important thing is to proclaim our support for the Palestinian armed struggle.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll move on to the next question. This question is going to be for Lubna. I'm going to briefly put it on screen and then take it away because it's a big block of text. I don't want to block anyone's faces. Question for Lubna and Tarek. As a new member and a descendant of a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany, I wholeheartedly support this motion. However, there will undoubtedly be fierce resistance to its passage. Do you have a sense of the level of support or opposition to this motion, both among the wider membership and the powerful players in the party executive and the like? Thank you. So, the question for Lubna. I'm not going to answer it. I'll just unmute you.
Yep. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Cool. I guess that the short of it is that, firstly, the record-breaking number of supporters that have already supported it in terms of proposers, it already sets that precedent. It already gives an answer that I guess will respond to your question, that people are ready to support that. And there will be, of course, resistance to it by those of the opposition. And the best sense or level of support, I mean, it's not about leadership or anyone else thinks this is a member-led party. And this is why it's so vital that the members step up and now actually support it. And in conference, that's when we will get our answer, if it's heard by this conference or pass to the following one. But either way, that is the bottom line. It is the people stepping in and speaking up and using their democratic right here to vote for it. That's what's going to matter, and that is what's going to make it succeed. And like we've said, it doesn't begin or end here. This has already, in a sense, been victorious in addressing the narrative. That was the whole basic point of this motion, was to address and confront a racist narrative that has far too long continued to dictate the terms of our oppression and then continued assault on our people, and now the genocide and erasure of our people. And this is our way of confronting the racist ideology and foundation upon which it's built. So now we, the people, must speak. And this is why we are literally on a drive to bring in everyone. It's not about purist politics now. This is about a motion drafted by Palestinians for Palestinians. It's not one that was drafted by the politicians. It was drafted by the people, by us, speaking on behalf of our family and people back home who cannot speak. When I went to visit them in the West Bank, they said to me, Lubna, there is so much more you can do from there than we can do here. We can't speak. Please be the voices that we are denied. Say the things we cannot say. And for those children, on the behalf of our children buried under the rubble of Gaza, we will speak and fight continuously for their liberation until we have it. And we urge everyone to share it. It's not limited to the Green Party. Let it go to your party, whatever party. I don't care what party. I just care that this doesn't, the cat is out the bag now. They cannot put it back in. So I hope that answers your question, and I thank you very much for your support.
Thank you very much, Lubna. This next question is going to be for Frank. Question: what are the best legal arguments against the IHRA definition, i.e. in a local council setting?
That's in the nicest possible way. That's kind of a non-lawyer's question, right? Because you can't sort of just make a generic legal argument against the IHRA definition. It depends very much on its context, the context in which it's being deployed. Is it in an employment setting? Is it judicial review challenging a local authority? So there's no one-size-fits-all legal argument that you can make against it. But broadly, as I'm fond of saying, the world is just people going into rooms and saying things. And I think the winning strategy when it comes to challenging the IHRA definition in court is simply to go in to court with the clear strategy of doing maximum damage to Zionism, doing maximum damage to the definition, and just stating some pretty clear and obvious and undisputed facts about what's actually going on the ground. So whenever I argued the case of IHRA, the case of Hussein and SRA, I should say, in which the IHRA definition figured prominently, and I think it's fair to say that that judgment did do some damage to the IHRA's examples. All we really did in that case was to talk about, for example, the fact that Israel is currently governed by fascists, right? And so you find yourself saying to the judge, well, is fascism racist? Are we allowed to suggest that a fascist project is also a racist one? And then, another tactic that you can deploy, and it's become much easier to attack the IHRA definition these last 2.5 years, is to simply include the judgments of the International Court of Justice in your bundle. And then you take the judge to, for example, we all saw that phenomenal South Africa opening submissions in the genocide case, right? That resulted in a judgment from the 26th of January 2024. And the judgment reported the speech of 3 senior Israeli politicians, right? Isaac Herzog, the president, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, and Israel Katz. And so you can just take the judge to those statements. You can say, well, there's no basis for disputing that those 3 men are senior Zionist politicians, and this is what they think, and this is what they say. They say the most outrageously racist things. Surely it must be possible to suggest that this is a racist endeavor. Surely it's possible to call for this project to be abolished. So I think our enemies are definitely on the back foot, and every time they attempt to rely on the IHRA definition in court, it seems that it gets chipped away at, right? So, my experience is that it's become very easy to challenge the IHRA definition if you just do it in a way that's principled. And I would say what I think we do need to do on the terrain of legal strategy, I do think we need to find the right claimant with the right set of facts and bring some kind of proactive judicial review of a British government body challenging its continued use of the IHRA definition. And this is why I say, as a lawyer, you can't really anticipate exactly what the arguments are going to be until you've seen the facts of a given case. But I absolutely think, and perhaps it's implicit in your question, that local authorities clearly are continuing to use the IHRA definition to greater or lesser extent, depending on the authority in question, and finding a good set of facts where someone has been personally affected by the use and the administration of that definition. In my opinion, where local authorities are doing that, they are definitely vulnerable to legal challenge. And if anyone wants to speak to me, publicly or in strict confidence, however you want to do it, you're very welcome to reach out to me to discuss strategy and tactics involving those kinds of cases. Because in my opinion, it's as I've said, the Zionist positions aren't really capable of defense. And there's been a strange kind of reticence in some parts of the movement about going on the offensive. But in my opinion, if we do go on the offensive, even in British courtrooms, their positions just completely collapse.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Professor Haim. Professor, do you think that if the support from the US, UK, and the West in general stop supporting the colonial entity, that it would immediately collapse? And how do you see a future peace in the people living in the Levant?
Well, just to be quick about it, because there are many questions that I can see on the screen. You remember that in the so-called 12-day war with Iran, Israel ran after 10 days to the United States and said, get me out of here. I'm running out of ammunition. And the Americans did the deed, which included bombing places that were vacated by the Iranians. And after 12 days, the war ended because Israel couldn't continue. Now, Israel is using more ammunition in a week at the height of this more than 2-year process than is used in Ukraine, which is about 20 times the size of Israel and 100 times and more size of Gaza. It's using much more ammunition. To give you a number, Israel has used 12 times the explosive power of the atom bomb that was dropped in August 45 on Japan, on 2 places. Yeah, that atom bomb was 15 kiloton, and Israel has used 12. The equivalent of 12 atomic bombs. Each of those atomic bombs killed 115,000 people. And of course, Gaza is a tiny place, and to actually have dropped 12 atom bombs on it, the equivalent of, is, of course, without precedent. So Israel cannot exist either in terms of ammunition, in terms of spare parts for its engines and jets, which Britain is supporting, of course, as well as the US, Italy, France, and Germany. But of course, it cannot exist, and it never existed in its 80 years history without money coming from the West. Huge amounts of money that supported crimes. So if you ask me for a timetable, it's not going to be very easy to say, but within a short period, one thing which will happen to Israel if the West stops supporting it is that it'll stop the genocide, and it'll stop what it's doing in the West Bank for a starter. And I totally agree with Frank and with Lubna that Zionism is at a terminal part of its history, and any support that will stop from the West will bring this forward and cut the pain of the Palestinians until it happens.
Thank you very much, Haim. This next question I'm going to address to Lubna. Question: if the party declares itself as anti-Zionist, I support it being anti-Zionist. What else must it declare itself to be in order to avoid hierarchies of racism and discrimination?
Anti-racist, but that's what it's already declared itself, unless I missed something in that question there. The point is it must take the actions that it states it does and implement the policies that it does have in place to reject all forms of racism and implement an equality for all approach. It must reject colonialism, imperialism, all of those things. I mean, it's all interlinked, isn't it? And when we oppose one form of racism, we oppose them all. That's ultimately at least how it should be. Unfortunately, at present, it's not, until we do oppose Zionism with it. But imperialism and colonialism, capitalism, all of those things, I feel would be right to add to our list of things that we are opposing, and hope to take it forward to a democracy and a process, a place that does offer peace to all and equality for everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question I'm going to ask is a two-part question. So I'm only going to read it out and put part of it on the screen. I think this one is going to be addressing to Haim. So, question. I grew up in a post-apartheid South Africa. I've read the Jewish Green Statement regarding the motion, and they make some relevant points in regards to the way Jewish members may perceive this motion and how they may impact their identity, affect their identity, and may impact the community life. These aren't good reasons to vote against the motion, but they do highlight a very real, very painful problems for Jewish members that they'll face. Now, part two of the question: being raised with Jewish Christian Zionism is effectively being raised in a cult. Freedom from Zionism is freedom for Jewish people too. Cult deprogramming is incredibly difficult, and we didn't go far enough in South Africa. Can we include a planned policy to show compassion and support to fellow Greens who will be struggling across the deconstruction of their brainwashing, and while also feel a very real backlash against the judgment from their unelected leadership? So I'm going to ask this question both to Haim and to Lubna. Your thoughts on this question?
Well, first I want to say that I already alluded to a period of 800 years in which Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived in the Muslim world, only in the Muslim world, may I say, in peace, in equality, and in justice. This period is called convivencia, and started in 711, a short while after the Muslim forces left Arabia, and ended in 1492 with the Reconquista of Spain and Portugal. In those 800 years, give or take, up and down, but what happened was life together, and actually what has taken place under convivencia was totally incredible. At the time that Europe was a backward, racist, sexist, colonial, occupational, I don't want to call it culture, but society. The Society of Al-Andalus in Spain actually laid the foundations of the Renaissance in literature, in philosophy, in medicine, in astronomy, in physics, in chemistry. I could go on. Poetry. There was a huge flowering of Hebrew. I mean, do people know that Hebrew as a language was dead until Al-Andalus, and there writing in Hebrew has flowered, as did the Spanish language. We call it Spanish today, but it wasn't called that in Al-Andalus, and it flowered under the Muslims, who were part of making it what it is. So life together between the three monotheistic religion is not a problem. It never has been a problem. It is always only a problem, has been a problem in Europe, because Europe has created everything that we can think of and shudder about, from military capitalism to industrial slavery to fascism and Nazism, and I could go on with this list. Of course, Europe presents itself as the source of all good, but this is not the reality that people in the last 2,000 years have lived. So I don't think there is a problem for Jews or for Muslims or for Christians living together. Indeed, in Palestine, for 2,000 years, they lived together beautifully. And you know what the exception was? The Crusades. And of course, now Zionism. So these are the only points where Jews had a problem, because Muslims had a problem, because Christians had a problem. When the Christian Crusaders came to Jerusalem at the end of the 11th century, everyone was killed. The Christians died with the Jews and Muslims. You know why? Because they lived together, so they died together. There is no problem for Jews. The problem is called Zionism. That is the real problem. And remember that before Zionism could occupy Palestine, it had to occupy the Jewish mind. So the Zionist occupation started with occupying the Jewish mind and the Christian mind through Christian Zionism. And now it's occupied all politicians of the West. We can see that. It's occupied the capitals of the West, the elites of the West, the media of the West. And I think we have to end this. This is harming everyone. As we speak, the United States and Israel are preparing to attack Iran. I hope it never happens, but the chances are that it will, and it will destroy not just the Middle East, but maybe the world, because the Israelis are likely to use an atom bomb in their desperation. So I think to protect Jews and to protect Muslims and to protect Christians, we need to end Zionism. Christian Zionism, Jewish Zionism, because it is it's a destruction engine. It's an engine of destruction in the Middle East, and it is used by the West to destroy every possible country in the Middle East, and the next one is Iran. There is no problem between the religions, which is inherent. The proof is, of course, the Muslim world.
Thank you, Haim. I'm just going to go quickly to Lubna. Is there anything else you'd like to add in response to this question?
Myself, are you asking me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I'm looking at the last part of the question about the backlash and the judgment from unelected leadership, and what we can do. That is the same question I'm looking at, right? Compassion,
yeah, that's the one.
support.
Yeah. From Kate.
The short of that is literally is just taking courage, is looking at the situation and analyzing it for what it is, and having the courage to step outside of that and join us. Your protection is with the people who are fighting against oppression, who will also fight against those who attempt to oppress you. But it's you that ultimately needs to make that choice. I grew up, as kids do, having fisticuffs at school. Mostly, it was me defending a younger child that was either getting bullied, or a black child that was getting picked up because of the color of their skin, or my Jewish friend. The same thing. We didn't see that as something that was somebody should be able to attack someone for their color or their religion. And I have younger siblings that I want to protect, and I don't want them to grow up in a world where they're being attacked because they're Muslim or they're Palestinian or for whatever they choose to be. And for this, we have to take the courage sometimes to stand up against everything that's unjust, to say it, to confront it and do it, and know that when you do that with others. This is a big movement. We are the majority. The majority of the world has woken up. They are watching this and they are opposing it. And you will be amongst those that stand righteous and for the liberation of the oppressed. And we care for each other in this movement. This is why we're doing it, is because we care for humanity. And we have to protect and guard each other while we're doing that. So we welcome you. Come and join us, support this motion, and be part of those that liberate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lubna. The last question is one I'm going to answer. So question, what's the timeline for voting on A105, please? Well, there's a prioritization ballot happening at the moment. So if you're a member of the Green Party, any member of the Green Party can vote on this prioritization ballot. Essentially, you rank the motions you want to be heard at conference, because conference in spring is just one day and it's online. Now, Greens for Palestine released a step-by-step guide on how to do this. So please follow us on Instagram and all other socials to see that video and to see how you can support a Motion A105 and make sure it gets heard. Conference will be held on the 28th of March online, and you can join and vote for the motion there. But please make sure that you do log in, do put forward that prioritization ballot. I wanted to say thank you to each of our speakers for their incredible presentations and for diligently answering these questions with me. Thank you to you for your contributions and for joining us. And thank you to all for supporting this motion and for hopefully getting it heard at conference. Thank you all.